Hello, it's Mr. Turek, and today we're going to go over the pop art tutorials. There's two of them, Lichtenstein and Warhol, and those are just the names I give to both of these because they're kind of similar. And the whole point of this lesson, again, is just like to show you that you can achieve the same results with different steps. A lot of beginners get kind of trapped in this idea that there's only one way to do things, and the beautiful thing about these pieces of software is that there's tons of different ways to make the same image. So we're going to start with, I'm just going to use this celebrity image here, Michael Pena. I was watching Ant-Man recently, and he's hilarious. So I'm not going to show you how to open Photoshop or open files. I assume you know how to do that by now. So the file's already open in Photoshop here. First thing you're going to do is check your image size. For this project, you want a pretty large image size. So go to Image, Image Size, and just make sure that your pixels, you got at least 1,000 pixels in both directions, and make sure your resolution is pretty high. 240 pixels per inch is pretty good for this image. If they're too small, just upscale your image a little bit for this assignment. I'm okay with you doing it for this because we're going to distort these images with filters and stuff, so it's okay if it looks a bit upscaled. So click OK if your image size is large enough. Alright, and the first thing we're going to do to this image is we're going to add some adjustment layers, and we're going to kind of play around with the creative possibilities of adjustment layers. So I'm going to go down to my layer panel here. I'm actually going to double click on this layer, the background layer, to make it a regular layer. I'm going to click OK, and that's going to make this a new layer. And we're going to go up to the adjustment panel. And the first adjustment we're going to make is a black and white adjustment layer. If I click on that, it's automatically going to turn my image to black and white. Okay? And by default, it just sort of puts these sliders in the middle. If we go to our properties panel, you can see that each color has sort of automatically been designated, whether it's bright or light. And we can kind of mess with this if you want. For portraits, usually the reds and the yellows are what determine what's lighter or darker. So if you mess with those, you can kind of play around with it a bit. Another way to play around with the lightness or the darkness of an image is to go to the adjustment panel, and then we're going to add a levels adjustment layer above our black and white adjustment layer. So click on the levels icon. And what the levels adjustment layer is it's a histogram. And a histogram is just a graph that sort of shows you how many colors are light and how many colors are dark. So there's a lot more dark colors in this image. And if I mess with these sliders, that sort of determines kind of how light or how dark my image is and how much you output those colors. So if we move our dark slider in, you'll notice those darker colors, if I move it in, they get a whole lot darker. If I do the white slider, and I move the white slider in, you notice the whites get a whole lot whiter. If I mess with the gray slider, that just shifts what true gray is for the image. Okay, so you can play around with that. I'm actually going to bring my white slider in quite a ways. I'm going to bring my black slider in just a little bit to make it higher contrast. Okay, so we made our image black and white, and we've done some global adjustments to it with the level adjustment layer. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all of this a smart object. And what that is going to do is it's going to protect our image layer from destructive editing. Smart objects are a good habit to get in, regular use of, because they just sort of protect your images from kind of destructive and not very useful edits. If you work with the smart object and you paint above or below the layer, you can easily make changes without having to reopen the file, or you can go back to your original a lot faster. So to do that, we're going to select our top adjustment layer. We're going to hold down the Shift key, and we're going to click on the bottom layer. And with all of these layers selected, we're going to go to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. Okay, and again, that makes this a smart object. You'll notice all those adjustment layers, they disappeared into this little layer icon right here. And if I ever wanted to adjust those adjustments layers again, I just sort of double click on my smart object, on the thumbnail, sorry. And that's actually going to open it in a new tab right up here. And basically it's like it's its own file. And I can go back and I can adjust these if I wanted to. Like let's say I want to make the reds a lot lighter, I can do that. I can make the yellows a bit darker, I can do that. Alright, and so that allows us to adjust these things within this file and protect our original file. We can still see those edits, but we can't actually change them in here, and anything we do to this layer is going to be protected by the smart object. Alright, so now that our image is black and white and it's a smart object, we're going to go to the filter gallery. But before we do that, we're actually going to go over to our swatches panel. We're going to set our foreground color to black and our background color to white. Essentially the default foreground and background colors. The reason for that is going to be not very apparent, but just make sure you do this before you go to the filter gallery. So black foreground, white background. And we're going to go up to Filter, Filter Gallery. And the filter we're actually going to use is already selected for us. It's under Sketch, and it's the Halftone Pattern filter. This is going to give us the halftone effect. Halftone pattern is kind of how newspapers print their images, and it's what Lichtenstein and Warhol used a lot because they did a lot of screenprint and they were trying to reference comic books. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're using that halftone pattern. So you can change the size if you want, from 2 to 3 or 4. I actually like it at 2, so I'm going to leave it at 2. And I'm not going to mess with the contrast too much. That looks alright. And when I'm happy with it, I'm going to click OK. And now we're going to add another filter. Right now, these halftone dots are real soft, and we're going to use a sharpening filter to make them nice and crisp. So we're going to go up to Filter, Sharpen. I'm going to go down to Smart Sharpen. And instantly you're going to see it kind of change. We want to set our amount to 500%. We want to set the radius to 64 pixels. And we want to reduce the noise to 0%. Okay? And then if you have these settings right here, you're going to click OK. And that's going to give us this nice, crisp, sort of newspaper look to our image. Alright, now we're going to add color to our image. So in the layer panel, go down to the new layer button, and you're going to add a new layer. And then we're going to pick a color for our new layer here. And we're going to use a hotkey shortcut. So I'm going to go over to my foreground color, and I'm just going to double click on my foreground color. And that's going to open the color picker dialog box. And I'm going to pick, let's pick like a light blue. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. So now you can see my foreground color is that light blue. Alright, if I go over to my new layer and I make sure it's active, there's a hotkey combo that fills that layer with your foreground color. And that hotkey combo is Alt+Delete. This saves you a lot of time. Usually there's a menu command and you have to do a bunch of extra steps to make a color fill layer, but Alt+Delete for replacing the layer with your foreground color is pretty quick. Alright, now we're going to change the blending mode of this blue fill layer right here. So the blending mode is in the layer panel, and with that layer selected, we're going to go up here, and it's already set to normal. We're going to change that blending mode to Lighten. So click on the drop down arrow and then go up to Lighten. And you'll notice in your image all the dark colors have been lightened by the pure blue color. And that's kind of a fancy Photoshop trick. It does some math with the color relationships and it automatically blends the two together in a specific way. So blending modes can be really handy for creative purposes like this. Let's say you wanted to change the overall appearance of your image. Because it's a smart object, you can open it back up by double clicking on it, and you can mess with your sliders. Like, let's say we don't want him to be so bright, we could turn those down. We can open up our levels, we can mess with those sliders. Okay, change that a little bit here and there. Click save. And then that'll kind of change the appearance of this a little bit. Alright. You can tell by going back in your history. So I added a little bit more detail there. Let's say we wanted to add some color. So if we want to add color, that's pretty easy. Just go to your brush tool. Let's see here. And go to your blue layer. And to use the brush tool, you can use your bracket keys to make it larger or smaller. You can go up to the option menu here and change the size of it. And then in your swatches panel, you ought to be able to pick different colored swatches and paint with those. Like let's say we want the shadows to be kind of this dark black. Paint his hair and the rest of him black again. Okay. Have some fun with color. You know, it's pretty easy to change the color of this. Because the blending mode is still set to Lighten though, our white stays white. And that can be kind of convenient if you're just trying to accent some features here and there. Play around with it, mess with it. It's pretty fun. Alright, so now I'm going to show you the Warhol tutorial, and I'm going to go through kind of similar steps, but a little bit differently, just to kind of prove to you that there's a bunch of different ways to achieve the same image, and there's a bunch of options in this software. So try to remember these sorts of like multi-path lessons for when you're stuck and you can't think of some other way to get what you want. There's usually always a way. There's always a different way of doing things that'll get you similar results. So I got my image open. I know what image size it is. Image size. It's large enough. Okay. And what I'm going to do first is copy this layer. To copy a layer, I'm going to go down to my layer panel. I'm going to double click on that background layer, and that's going to make it a regular layer. Click OK with the new layer dialog box. And to copy it, it's real easy. Just click and drag that layer down to the new layer button and let go of it over the new layer button. And that should make a copy of it. And then we're going to use invert adjustment layer. To add an invert adjustment layer to this new layer, and only this new layer, we're going to mask it to that layer. Okay? But first we've got to add it, so we're going to go up to adjustments. We're going to go down to invert, and we're going to click on it to add an invert adjustment layer. And to mask it to that layer, we can just click this mask button right here. So if we click that, it's only going to affect this layer. It's not going to affect this one. So the way I know that is I can turn this layer off, and lo and behold, it's not affecting this at all. If this layer mask option isn't checked, it affects both layers beneath it. So make sure you check this layer mask option. Okay? Alright, so we got the inverted layer on top of the regular layer. Now we're going to change the blending mode of this inverted layer to color dodge. So we're going to click on that layer in our layer panel. We're going to go to blending modes. And we're going to switch it to color dodge. And you're going to notice our image turns white. This is because color dodge does some really weird math. And essentially, it's just dodging every single color present in the inverted layer, which would mean everything gets white because of that. Alright, we're going to add some filters to this inverted layer. So before we do that, we're going to make it a smart object so that we can adjust the filters later if we want to. So if I click on my inverted layer and hold down the Shift key and click on my invert adjustment layer, I'm going to go up to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. Okay? And you might lose your blending mode. If you do, just go back to Color Dodge, turn it to Color Dodge. And now we're going to add a filter to this smart object. To add the filter, we're going to make sure this layer is selected, our smart object layer. We're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And right away you're going to see our image pop back into focus just a little bit. We can kind of change that blur however we want, and if you have the preview box checked, you can kind of see the effect in our image. I don't want that much, but I want just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at 6 pixels, and then I'm going to click OK. Alright, so this image has kind of got some really weird colors going on here. And we actually want it to be black and white so that we can add one specific color to it at the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some more adjustment layers to change the color. So we're going to go to Adjustments, and we're going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. You click on that. We're going to go down to Saturation. We're going to turn the saturation all the way down. And that's just kind of a quick way to make our image automatically black and white. Now we're going to add another global adjustment layer, and we're going to add a curves layer. And a curves layer is like a levels layer, but it's way more complicated and actually better for these kind of global dark light adjustments. So we're going to click on the curves option in the adjustment panel. And when the curves layer opens, we're actually going to turn down the middle of the curve here, and that's going to make our outline a whole lot darker. Alright, once we've added all of those adjustment layers, we're actually going to go down to our layer panel, and we're going to make all of this stuff one smart object. And the reason for that is because we kind of just want to adjust the whole thing as a group, sort of. So we're going to click on this top curves layer once. We're going to hold down the Shift key. We're going to click on the bottom layer. And with all of these layers selected in our layer panel, we're going to go up to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. And you may be asking yourself, like, why are we adding all of these smart object sandwiches to this? It's going to make some sense, but for now, this is all you need to know, is that every one of those adjustments we made, we can always open our Smart Object and go back and we can tweak those. You can always change them. If I want this to be lighter or darker, I can go in here and I can mess with that. As long as I save it, you can see the results of it in the other file. Alright, now we're going to add a filter to this Smart Object. So we're going to go up to Filter-Pixelate-Halftone. Now you can't see a preview of this, but what we're going to do is we're going to make sure each of these channels is set to 45 degrees. So go into each of these boxes and enter 45. And then for the max radius, let's make it 5 and see what that looks like. Okay, once we've got all these set to 45 and turn down the radius a bit, click OK. And that's going to give us our halftone pattern. You'll notice that it's not perfect. So if we want to adjust it, we can always, again, we can just double click on our, our Smart Object. And we can adjust any part of this. Because it's all Smart Objects, we could go back into our blur. And we could adjust the blur. Maybe give it a little less of a blur there, like that. We could turn up our curves and increase some of the contrast there. Mess with this. Just see what that does. Okay. Looks like it's changed just a little bit. Could go back and forth a couple times. Just to see what'll make a difference. Okay. We'll hit save. And then let's see what happened over here. Okay, getting a little bit more detail. Not bad. If I don't like how the color halftone looks, maybe I go back in here and I make my dots just a little bit smaller. Let's make them 3 pixels. Click OK. Oop, gotta make them 4. Hey, that's not too bad. Alright, let's say we want to add some color to this image and just add like a base color. And let's say we just want to change the white to a solid color without changing the black. Let's use blending modes and a fill color layer. To make a new solid fill color layer, we're going to go down to our layer panel, and under the new layer option menu thing, click on that, and then one of the options at the very top is going to be solid color. So click on that. And that's going to open the color picker. And let's just pick a blue again. My favorite color is blue. So let's pick a blue. We'll click OK. And this automatically fills it with editable solid color. You might think that's great, but really it means it's not pixels. It's not rasterized, so you can't paint on this layer. You can always change the color if you want by double clicking on it. But it doesn't behave the way a painting layer would, so it can be kind of annoying to work with. And it also comes with a layer mask, so to get rid of that, you click on that, right click, delete layer mask, right click on the layer, rasterize. So the Alt+Delete hotkey is a much faster way to get to this point. Once you have your color fill layer, you're going to switch the blending mode to linear burn. And that's up here at the top, linear burn. And what that's going to do is that's going to change the white to your solid color, and it's going to leave the black normal. And if you want, you can start painting other colors in here. Warhol kind of liked to paint really sloppy, and he didn't really stain the lines. So if you want to make it look like Warhol and you want to paint some other colors, switch your brush by clicking on the brush tool or hitting B. If you go under these brush presets, under the wet media brushes, there's a couple of weird, fun media brushes that you can use. If you play around with these, and they have some weird special properties. If you look at these little icons here, that just means it's a mixer brush. So it's going to pick up some of the colors beneath it and sort of mix those in. And you'll see that the options bar is a little bit different. It's got a wetness setting, a load setting, a mix setting. We could turn that up if we wanted to. We could turn the load down, just play with these and mess around. I'm gonna pick a different weird color. Let's use a tangerine orange here. And when I paint on this color fill layer, you'll notice it just sort of blends in weird ways. And that's a really easy way to get that sort of Warhol impressionistic sloppy effect. And we can just sort of have fun with that and mix and blend willy-nilly. Have some fun with that, play around with it. When you run out of your blend, you're going to notice that it's showing you how much of your load is in the brush at the top. Sort of reload or change it by clicking on that icon. You can just play around with it. Have some fun with it. Warhol also liked to paint over his screen prints. If you want to get that effect, essentially all you have to do is go to your color fill layer and just add a brand new blank layer above it. And then use one of the colors from your background and just sort of paint over this black part. And you can kind of give it the effect of like, oh, I'm painting over the screen print portion. If you look up Andy Warhol's work online, you'll sort of see him do this from time to time. And that's how you do the Warhol tutorial. Again, I'm showing you both of these tutorials just because they're kind of the same results, but different set of steps to get to this point. And that can be really useful for thinking creatively in this program. This is how I want you to think. I don't want you to get stuck and get disenfranchised with the program. I want you to think of different ways of making your images.